In a storage room beneath a museum, a scanner beam crossed a palm-sized clay tablet from Nippur, circa 1900 BCE. The accession card read, "Scribal vocabulary exercise, a list of divine powers the gods controlled. Kingship, music, wisdom, justice. 2 words, same column. No reason to be there. Why list fear beside the power to enter and leave the land of the dead?" A second tablet makes the answer worse. The tablet was not supposed to matter. In the world of ancient Mesopotamian studies, the vocabulary lists from Nippur are everywhere. Thousands survived. Temples used them as curriculum. Scribal students pressed the same signs into the same clay, generation after generation, the way students copy grammar exercises into notebooks. Most of these texts are useful only to specialists. They catalog trees, animals, professions, gods. They tell you what scribes knew, not what anyone feared. They are the ancient world's textbooks, completely expected, endlessly predictable. So when this one arrived under a scanner beam, no one was looking for anything wrong. The work was routine. The cuneiform columns were tight and regular, each wedge mark pressed cleanly into the fired clay. The content was exactly what the accession card promised, a list of the May, the divine powers the Sumerian gods were said to hold. These were not prayers, not mythology. They were an inventory of what divinity controlled. Kingship belonged to one god, the wisdom of scribes to another. Music, agriculture, the flood. Each power assigned like a portfolio distributed across heaven. By any reasonable measure, the most administrative piece of writing you could find from 4,000 years ago. The problem was 2 words. In the middle of the column, in the same clean cuneiform grammar as everything before and after it, sat a cluster of powers that had no business being grouped together. Among the listed functions, descent into the netherworld, ascent from it, the same tablet listed, fear and outcry. Not as a consequence of something, not as an emotion mortals felt, as a power, a me, something a god could hold, transfer, deploy. Something listed beside the ability to cross between the living world and the land of the dead, the way a key might be listed beside a door. You know how one wrong word can change the meaning of an entire message. The rest of the message can be completely ordinary, and then one word sits in it that doesn't belong, and suddenly the whole thing reads differently. That is what happened here. Fear was not described as something people experienced when they thought about death. It was described as something a god possessed and used, something that traveled, something that, in this specific cluster, appeared directly beside the entrance to the underworld. The safe reading says this is poetic theology. The Sumerian gods had complex portfolios. Fear was part of divine power. The grouping reflects religious logic, not operational design. To mainstream scholars, this is how ancient texts work. The me are symbolic expressions of divine authority, not a manual. That interpretation is credible. It has decades of serious scholarship behind it. But the cluster does not disappear because of the explanation. Fear and outcry, descent into the netherworld, ascent from it, listed together in the same register, as if the person who pressed these signs into the clay understood something specific about the relationship between fear and the threshold between the living and the dead. That is where the safe explanation starts to crack. The Sumerian underworld was called Kur, sometimes Kurnugi. It was not the place evil people went. Everyone went. Kings and beggars, heroes and servants. All of them ended in Kur, in what the texts describe as a dark, dusty cavern where nothing grows and the dead eat nothing but clay. 7 gates stood between the world of the living and the deep place below, and at each gate a soul was stripped. This stripping is described precisely. Not poetically, precisely. The first gate took the crown, the symbol of identity and rank. The second removed the lapis beads. The third, the breastplate. The fourth, the gold ring. The fifth, the measuring rod and line. The sixth, the garment. By the seventh gate, a soul arrived without a single attribute. No crown, no jewels, no power, no presence. Just the thing that had once been a person, stripped in a specific sequence until it could not be recognized as what it had been. The mainstream reading calls this theology. Death equalizes all. Even in Nana, the Queen of Heaven herself must enter Kur without rank or power. The stripping demonstrates that death respects nothing and no one. That reading fits the text. Scholars are not wrong. But here is what it does not fully explain. The stripping happened in a specific order. Crown first, because the crown announced who you were before you spoke. Garment last, because the garment was the final proof that something was there. The first thing stripped was the marker of identity. The last thing stripped was the marker of existence. That is not random poetic imagery. That is a sequence. The last power a soul carries into the underworld is the one that announced it as a presence. Fear strips that too, before the gates even begin. His name was Namtar, the vizier of the underworld, the son in some texts of Ereshkigal herself. His name meant fate or destiny in Sumerian. He was the one who carried the decree. When death was decreed for a mortal, Namtar delivered it. He escorted souls into Kur. He was, by official description, a divine official with a function, a rank, a role. Then the Death of Gilgamesh texts describe him differently. These fragments from Nippur, dated to around 2100 BCE, were not a myth about divine politics. They were about a king dying. And in them, the text says this: "Inhuman Namtar is heavy upon him, Namtar that has neither hand nor foot, who drinks no water, eats no grain." Stop there. A god with neither hand nor foot does not function like a god. A presence that drinks nothing, eats nothing, has no physical form. That is not the description of a character. That is the description of a condition. Something that settles over a person before death arrives. Something invisible that holds. In the incantation texts from Farah, dated to around 2500 BCE, Namtar appears again, not as a divine official standing at a gate, but as something that enters the body. The verb the text uses is not arrives, it is inhabits, since his body contained the Namtar demon with its evil. Contained. You contain a substance, you do not contain a character. It is like reading a legal document that says fear was found in the defendant. Not that the defendant felt afraid, found, as if someone placed it there, as if fear were a substance that could be inserted before anything else happens. If Namtar is the name for a specific, deployable state that settles over a soul before death, if the word for fate and the word for what prepares you for the underworld are the same word because they describe the same function, then the me list stops being a vocabulary exercise, and the question of what it was recording becomes harder to put down. And then there is Enkidu. In the 12th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh and its older Sumerian source, Gilgamesh sends his companion Enkidu into the underworld to retrieve two objects. Before Enkidu descends, Gilgamesh gives him a precise set of instructions. Do not put on clean clothing. Do not anoint yourself with good oil. Do not carry your weapon. Do not embrace your wife. Do not kiss your son. The safe reading calls these ritual prohibitions, taboos. The underworld has laws, and breaking them brings consequences. That is the mainstream interpretation. But Enkidu breaks every single one, and the underworld keeps him, not because he was evil. The text is precise about why. The gatekeepers saw him. He was recognizable. He behaved like a living person, and the system identified him and held him. If you had to design a system to detect and retain living souls, you would not design it much differently from this. Clean clothing signals identity. Scented oil signals a living body. Weapons signal capacity and rank. Embracing family signals selfhood. Each behavior is a marker. Each marker makes you visible as something the system should process. The rules Gilgamesh gives are not moral instructions. They are operational ones. To move through Kur without triggering it, you must not behave like yourself. And a person in maximum fear does not behave like themselves. Fear suppresses identity signaling behavior. Fear makes a person move like a shadow. If fear is a me, transferable, applicable, deployable, and if Namtar inhabits the body before the gates begin, then a soul would arrive at the first gate already stripped of the behaviors that mark it as present. The 7 gates would not be removing power from a self. They would be removing the last residue of a self that fear had already begun to dismantle. The trap does not close on the body. It closes on the self. Now consider the descent corpus. The story of Inanna's journey into Kur was assembled from more than 50 separate cuneiform tablets, most of them excavated from Nippur in the 19th century. Some are in Philadelphia, some in Istanbul. Some fragments remain unpublished, and in the section that surrounds the fear cluster, the me of fear and outcry, there is a damaged line that multiple translators have handled differently. Some readings suggest Inanna carries fear as she descends, that it is among the powers she brings into the underworld. Other readings suggest it is what Ereshkigal uses on Inanna after her arrival, that the underworld deploys it. Both interpretations exist in the literature. There is no consensus. The official translation stops at ambiguous. But what if the ambiguity is not a problem with the text? What if fear moves in both directions because it is designed to? Applied at the entrance to collapse identity, generated internally afterward to prevent the soul from reconstructing itself. It would not need to be hidden in the damaged line. It would be the damaged line. The archive noted the fragment as pending fuller study. The catalog card read, "Associated fragment, location unclear." No one had to hide the object. They only had to stop asking what the line meant. Here is where the story leaves the museum. The underworld in Sumerian texts is not imagined as chaos. It is a city. Ereshkigal rules from a throne. Namtar enforces her decrees. The gatekeeper Neti controls the 7 gates. The goddess Geshtinana records the names of the arriving dead. 7 Anunnaki judges sit in assembly and deliver verdicts. Administrative records, prescribed procedures, statuses, rights, and obligations. The Gilgamesh texts describe it as having rules as rigid as those in any Sumerian royal court. Mainstream scholars are right about this. The Sumerians imagined the cosmos as an administration because administration was the most advanced organizational structure they knew. Of course, the underworld looked like a city-state court. But here is what that explanation does not address. Every functioning system has an intake protocol. The 7-gate stripping is the intake protocol. Namtar delivers the decree and inhabits the body beforehand. Neti opens the gates in sequence. Geshtinana records the name. The Anunnaki fix judgment, and the soul's identity is removed before any of this begins, not after judgment, not as consequence, but as the first step, not as punishment, as processing. The soul in Kur is not tortured. It eats dust. It wears feathers like a bird. It continues in what the texts call a shadow version of life on earth. It knows enough to be thirsty. Families were required to pour libations through clay pipes into graves so ancestors could drink, because the soul in Kur retained enough awareness to suffer from thirst. It remembered enough to want, but it could not rise. It could not leave. It could only receive what was poured down to it from above. Memory present, agency absent. The soul knows it existed. It does not know how to exist. Fear, neurologically and experientially, produces exactly this state in a living person. Maximum fear preserves awareness while collapsing capacity. A person in the grip of genuine terror knows precisely what is happening and cannot act on what they know. If fear is applied as a me at the threshold of the underworld, not as a feeling that arises naturally, but as a transferable divine power deposited into the soul before the gates begin, then what arrives at the first gate is not a self. It is an awareness that has lost the ability to function as one. Aware enough to receive libations, not functional enough to leave. The second ingredient is not a weapon. It is an absence, and the Sumerians gave it a name. Then the same structure appeared somewhere it should not exist. The Orphic mystery traditions of ancient Greece contain specific instructions for the soul after death. The soul will come to two springs. On the left is the spring of Lethe, forgetting. On the right is the spring of Mnemosyne, memory. Do not drink from the left, the Orphic gold tablets say. If you drink from the left, you will forget who you are and return to the cycle of lives without any knowledge of what you were. If you drink from the right, you retain identity. You can communicate with the judges of the dead. You can navigate. The gold tablets were real objects. Some are in the British Museum, some in the Getty. Thin, delicate, hammered leaves of gold pressed with text, placed in the hands of the dead as instructions for a journey. And the journey they describe uses the same two variables as the Sumerian system. Fear at the threshold, followed by forgetting inside. Identity collapses first through terror. Then memory dissolves what remains. The soul that has forgotten itself cannot call for help, not because it is silenced, because it no longer remembers the words. Mainstream comparative religion acknowledges the structural connection between Mesopotamian underworld theology and Greek mystery traditions. The parallel is real and studied. Cultural transmission through the ancient Near East is well documented. What is not mainstream is the framing of these parallels as functional rather than symbolic. The suggestion that both traditions may preserve an actual description of what happens to awareness after death, encoded in the mythology available to each culture. That interpretation is not confirmed. It is not provable by current methods. But the pattern keeps appearing. Two cultures, two languages, separated by centuries. The same two ingredients, the same sequence. Fear first, forgetting second. The trap does not need walls. It needs those two things. And this is where the mystery becomes modern. Since around 2020, multispectral imaging and AI-assisted translation tools have been applied to cuneiform tablets. In 2024, a tablet from Nippur labeled Ni 12501 was fully decoded after sitting in the Istanbul archaeological museums for more than a century. Its museum number had been omitted from a major reference work published in 1956. The tablet contained a complete forgotten myth. A storm god trapped in Kür, a fox navigating the underworld by hiding the food and drink offered to him so the realm could not claim him. An entire story, sitting in storage for over 100 years because no one had asked the right question about it. Multispectral imaging can reveal cuneiform signs pressed beneath surface damage, invisible to standard light. The descent of Inanna corpus, assembled from more than 50 tablets across multiple institutions, has never been subjected to unified modern imaging. It contains the damaged line, the cluster where fear appears. The fragment whose location is listed as unclear. Some researchers working outside mainstream institutions have suggested that the two ingredients, fear and the second thing, may only become fully legible when the separated fragments are imaged together for the first time. That claim is speculative. No such imaging has been confirmed. But the technology is real. The damaged line is still damaged. The most frightening version of this story is not that someone hid the information. It is that it has been in a drawer for 4,000 years, and no one asked what those two words were doing in that column. Now consider Inanna. the Queen of Heaven, who descended into Kir and came back. She is the only figure in the Sumerian texts who enters the underworld and returns with her identity intact. The text is precise about how. She prepared before she descended. She gave instructions to her servant Ninshubur. If I am not back in 3 days, go to the temples, do not stop. She had a plan that would function on her behalf while she was inside the system. She was not surprised at the threshold, and she did not consume the food or drink of the dead. Inanna refused. She hung on a hook for 3 days. The text describes her corpse like meat, something that had lost the capacity to be afraid because it had lost the capacity to be anything, and still she was retrieved, because she had prepared, because she had not consumed, because fear was not the last thing she felt before the first gate. The underworld does not trap souls through punishment. It traps them through procedure. The first ingredient strips you at the door. The second keeps you from finding the door again. And the only figure who exited did so because she refused to let either one fully work. The Sumerian underworld is the oldest recorded afterlife system where the mechanisms are described rather than the morality. There is no judgment of deeds in the original Kir. The soul is not weighed for goodness. It is processed. Namtar delivers the decree. The gates strip identity in sequence. Geshtinana records the name. The soul takes its place in the shadow version of what it was. To mainstream scholars, this reflects a sophisticated theology of death as administrative certainty. The Sumerians conceptualizing mortality as something as organized and impersonal as their own governance. That reading is credible. It requires nothing extraordinary. But according to some alternative researchers, the descent of Inanna and the related tablets describes something more literal, a designed system for processing awareness after death, using 2 specific tools, fear applied at the threshold and memory erasure administered by the conditions of the realm itself. They point to the me list. They point to Namtar's description as a substance that inhabits the body. They point to the Enkidu checklist. They point to the Orphic parallels. They point to the damaged line. And they ask a question the official explanation has not fully answered. Why would symbolic poetry need to be this operationally specific about the sequence of identity removal, the behavioral markers of a living soul, and the conditions under which the trap fails? The official reading may still be correct. The me of fear may be purely theological. Namtar may be metaphor all the way through. The 7-gate sequence may be timeless symbolism about mortality. All of this is possible. But the pattern keeps appearing in the same form, the same sequence, the same 2 variables, across the oldest written texts in human history. In cultures that had every reason to describe the afterlife differently and kept arriving at the same ingredients. The tablet from Nippur is still in the archive. The accession card still reads, Scribal vocabulary exercise. The fear cluster is still in the same column as the power to enter and leave the land of the dead. The damaged line is still damaged. The separated fragment is still listed as location unclear. The label has not changed. The tablet is still in the drawer. And fear is still on the list.